Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian. I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things, but I had not yet gotten started making those back when the Guy tried infidelity. I feel like the broad strokes of this story are very familiar all the same. Ned Fulmer, a former BuzzFeed employee who had made an online brand for himself as a wife guy, was caught in public, photographed in the act of what he would call a consensual workplace relationship. Ned was having an affair, not just cheating on the wife he so branded himself with, but doing so with an employee. Even later attempts at addressing this seem based in trying to reframe any particular power imbalance in the relationship. He'll go out of his way to mention that she was a producer.
3 years ago, I cheated on my wife with my producer.
But not to mention that he served not only as a CEO and a star, but also in an HR capacity. In fact, this abuse of power helped enable the other three stars of the second Try company to conduct an internal investigation, buy out his shares in the business that they spawned off of their BuzzFeed success, and make a video disavowing this behavior in their former collaborator. Many people's first exposure to this story, since it happened to involve such very online figures, was when it crossed into the mainstream for a Saturday Night Live sketch. In the SNL telling, the emphasis is placed onto this employee being a food baby, and it's 5 minutes of unfunny SNL patter about how absurd the remaining Try Guys are for being upset by their collaborator cheating on his wife, essentially. The sketch isn't funny, and it isn't good, but I also tend not to think of it as some grand conspiracy. I say that because much of the comment section below the sketch here on YouTube talks about a friend of Ned's being the one to write this and acts as though it was commissioned per Ned's request. It does seem to check out that the Try Guys had friends on the show. In fact, two of the remaining guys even said in an interview that they got a heads up about the sketch before it aired because they had a friend on the show who texted them.
We also got a tip off that it was going to air.
Yeah.
Oh, we got
Cast member gave us an advanced text about 2 hours before.
I don't tend to think that Ned Fulmer requested this or even really had the pull for it, though. While the skit does do Ned the enormous favor of playing down the power imbalance and implicitly taking his side over the other guys who it is mocking for having such a response to the scandal and downplaying their upset into them being mad to not be told that their friend had a consensual kiss, it also does quite a bit of the old man yells at cloud humor that's so common to Saturday Night Live. Half the joke is, can you imagine knowing or caring about this? And it's just not funny. But it's not funny in a way that feels really standard for Saturday Night Live. So while I think they leaned into the consensual workplace relationship angle in a way that was beneficial to Ned, and while I understand as hyperbole the idea that this was Ned Fulmer PR, I think it strikes me similarly to their attempt at a Chapel Roan skit, also with Bowen, actually, where they clearly know so little about what they're commenting on that whatever point they were attempting to make got muddied. I bring all this up not to let Ned Fulmer off the hook or anything, but more to remind you that Saturday Night Live is consistently disrespectful and bad, and also that Ned was being granted a sort of societal benefit of the doubt by the writers of that sketch, if not a personal one. And the thing about that societal benefit of the doubt is that I'm pretty sure it's something that only gets bestowed onto men. I think a main difference between the response to the situation on SNL and the one that was happening online is that it's harder to sell that benefit of the doubt when you know very much about Ned Fulmer and the way he seemed to want to be conceived of. This was the wife guy, the married one. That was his whole thing. People who had seen that marketing, people who had bought that marketing, had a very different reaction compared to the Saturday Night Live sketch that wanted to be offended about being asked to know about this in the first place. I didn't feel like I had very much to say about this at all when I thought it was just a cheating scandal. Like, I didn't address the Coldplay Jumbotron CEO thing either, and that was in part because I'm scared of the digital panopticon we all live in. I don't disagree that at times the reaction to a cheating scandal, or even something that gets blown into a cheating scandal, can be completely out of proportion. Also, Devin Walker did a podcast somewhat recently where he mentioned that the writer of that sketch had to have security assigned to him because he was receiving death threats over the sketch. Devin claims that the writer wasn't even actively friends with Ned, that they just went to school together. I don't disagree with the knee-jerk reaction of how is this my business when a cheating scandal happens, and I also don't disagree, obviously, that the doxing of SNL writers and the harassing of the actors who were in that mean-spirited skit was not something that was in proportion or that would have been helpful to the situation. Hot take, I don't think anyone should be doxxed. I think doxing is really bad and scary. It can be super dangerous, and unfortunately, in the very online world we live in, it's something many of us are at risk for even without a job at Saturday Night Live that can provide us with security. Which is why I would love to thank the sponsor of today's video, Aura. I think a lot of us don't really have the opportunity to go through and realize exactly how much data is being scraped from our online activities until somebody scrapes enough to scare us and tip us off. This over here is a redacted example of the kind of information that a typical People Finder website will sell to literally anyone who wants it. That means spammers, scammers, and stalkers. If they want to pay some money, they can get their hands on something that looks like this, that will tell them phone numbers, email addresses, physical addresses, even relatives, roommates, and neighbors. With a report like this, they can find degrees, online usernames, bankruptcy, and traffic violations, all laid out for them in a convenient several-page PDF. It's genuinely terrifying to know that somebody might have this kind of information even before they actually cause any harm with it, which they very much can. People get their identity stolen all the time. They also get their inboxes flooded with spam, get their home addresses in the hands of bad actors. The internet is huge, and it seems like you have to hand over so much of your data to even participate in it these days. Even when I first became aware of these shady People Finder sites and first found myself on one, I proceeded to lose sleep over how many more must exist that I wouldn't even be able to find for myself. And that's exactly where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in, because they can help by identifying the data brokers producing this sort of report. Aura takes care of the hard part, automatically removing your information from these sites and keeping it off. There are a lot of other services that offer this too, but none of them offer as many features as Aura does for the same price, and that's important to me. With Aura, you can get alerts if your personal information is found on the dark web, real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, 24/7 monitoring to help keep your identity secure, a secure VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more, with US-based support available around the clock if something goes wrong. And if anything does happen, Aura includes up to $5 million in identity theft insurance protection and has US fraud experts ready to help. You can try Aura for 14 days for free at aura.com/ofidoki. In those 2 weeks, Aura will get to work scrubbing your personal info off these data broker sites for you. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring this video and so many others on the channel. Let's get back into it. When I thought this was primarily a story about a cheating scandal, I was fully uninterested in consuming content about it. At some point, just from being online at the time it happened, I had gleaned enough to know that there was some imbalance of power going on with Ned being a CEO and part owner of Second Try, but again, I didn't make videos yet at that point, and even if I did, that's not really my typical beat. While I don't completely align with the SNL take of mocking anyone who was invested, I did feel like the amount of fervor around it was kind of fascinating. I quite liked some of the discourse I saw on social media at this time, discussions of the so-called wife guy, dissections of the way heterosexually married men sometimes use their far more interesting wives to hide behind and curry favor. But by and large, cheating scandals don't do much to hold my attention. Like, I understand Adam Levine cheated on his wife. I know those DMs were all over the place, but it's a storm that seems to have passed pretty quickly, right? I guess maybe that's because it's more expected for a musician type to cheat on his spouse. Sure, by being married and having pictures at events with your wife and kids, you are presenting to the world a different thing than you're actually living out. There is a level of hypocrisy there, but Adam Levine hadn't been elevated to the title of wife guy, and so I feel like there was less backlash when he failed to live up to it. Like, being a guy with a wife does not make you a wife guy, but having a little action figure that says, "My wife," does.
My wife!
All this to say, my interest in the Try Guys scandal actually didn't start until about a week ago when Ned Fulmer released the first episode of what he's calling Rock Bottom with Ned Fulmer. I learned that a couple of my friends had kept a much closer eye on all of this when it went down than I had. After a People magazine exclusive came out ahead of the first episode of his new show, confirming that Ariel Fulmer would be his first guest, I knew that this whole thing was about to break back into the cultural discourse in a big way. We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of the scandal breaking. Maybe why the podcast launched this month, I'm actually not sure. And we also just had a few days this summer where the seemingly universal interest in a rich couple cheating at a Coldplay concert took over the internet and confirmed that everybody is still very interested in cheating scandals. So, once it had been confirmed that Ned and Ariel Fulmer were indeed separated and did seem to intend on speaking about their experience during the scandal a few years back, my friends and I watched the episode together. This is, other than the video on the couch where the remaining 3 Try Guys denounced Ned and announced that they would be moving forward without him, maybe the first piece of Try Guys adjacent content I have ever even watched, and I relied very heavily on Marty and Cheyenne filling in pieces of context that Ned didn't seem particularly interested in clarifying. Because in the podcast episode, the cheating scandal is largely kind of brushed aside by Ned. There's a lot of passive voice, a lot of what happened, and not a lot of when I betrayed you. I found the podcast episode to be a really, really hard watch. Like, I would not have finished it if I was watching it alone, sort of hard watch, and that's for a few reasons. I know I have no space to throw stones when I struggle so much with my own microphone settings, but the audio in this was really bad. And there was also quite a bit of dead air, which makes sense in the context of the conversation being had, but not in the context of an attempt to make interesting content. And, it's very clear that the idea of having this podcast episode at all was, in theory, so that it would be interesting content. Ned Fulmer was rebranding, and doing so by interviewing his ex-wife. Not a huge change in branding from being a wife guy, I wouldn't say. That in and of itself is all strange enough to me. Another friend of mine said that it was the most content-brained thing they could imagine to have that kind of conversation to launch a podcast with, and I really can't say I disagree. I mean, look, I have content brain too. Here I am talking about it. I do feel a little bit more justified in speaking about it now that Ariel seems to have done the closest thing she ever has to opting into being part of this story. While I think the conceit of this podcast episode is odd, they are clearly having a conversation they've had many times already in therapy. I do understand why she might want to have that conversation, why it would be appealing for her to have her side of the narrative out there. Because Ariel comes off just supremely well in this podcast, I would say. I've been really relieved that the public opinion around this episode seems to mostly be protect Ariel flavored. It's not hard for me to imagine a timeline where the reaction to her was a bit less favorable after this podcast episode. If she had been a little bit too angry with him, maybe, or if she hadn't been angry enough. But in the podcast, Ariel looks wonderful. Like, even just physically, she's kind of glowing. I know a lot of people seem to be focusing on the parts where she seems uncomfortable, and you can tell when those happen, but she looks great, and it seemed to me like she was mostly at peace with the situation by now. It's a messy situation, as all divorces pretty much are, but they seem to have worked out a co-parenting situation that works for them while also being separated. And Ariel has a chance to say how hurt she was by the betrayal she experienced, to talk about living under the sort of scrutiny the internet fervor around this situation brought their way. She also has a chance to tell Ned that she doesn't particularly forgive him, to express her anger and her grief. And Ned is there. He's definitely there during all of that. He doesn't seem to be a particularly skilled interviewer. He doesn't make many attempts at comforting her. She talks about feeling shame and grief after the affair went public, and he tells her that he's sorry society did that to her.
Not only did you having an affair just it shattered our marriage, but it also, like, all of that guilt and shame, you like hoisted that on me. Like, you gave that to me. And now I have to carry that around for the rest of my life.
I don't think it's fair that as a society you're put in that position. It's certainly not true.
Again, that's what I mean. Very passive voice from Ned. I guess in theory, the idea is that he's taking accountability by doing this podcast at all, but with how evasive he is and without a conversation about what it actually meant for him to be in a relationship with a producer, I'm not sure that he understands what he was being held accountable for in the first place. I don't feel like reacting to the entire episode, and so I won't. But I do want to talk about what each participant in this podcast stands to gain from it before I zoom back out to a few years ago. While I at first was so caught on what an enormous favor it seemed like Ariel was doing to Ned to appear on his podcast and help him launch his rebrand, I've since come around to realize that this likely serves as a good way for her to put a cap on a narrative that's clearly been plaguing her for the last few years, and also to promote her next venture. Ariel said, at Ned's direct prompting, that she does not have an interest in returning to a career on social media. Something I don't and can't blame her for. She is focusing instead on her pottery, and Nick, I keep calling him Nick. That's not even a bit, I just genuinely keep calling this guy Nick. And Ned didn't even link her website in the description, which is really annoying. I have her work linked below if you want to take a look at it. I think it looks really pretty. It's not exactly the style that I would gravitate toward personally, but the pieces are clearly well made and have a sense of style to them that feel coherent. I would like to hope that she gets not only a boost to her sales from this, but also some support moving forward. And I'd also like to hope that they made a deal where she gets to keep all the money from this podcast episode and that it's his most profitable podcast episode ever, but I'm less sure about that part. As for what Ned stands to gain from this, well, if he had done it right, he stood to potentially gain back some of his audience, right? The first video in this podcast series is currently sitting at around 900,000 views, which is, to be fair, significantly more views than I have ever achieved. But it seems to be because people wanted to watch Ariel. People wanted to gawk at a car wreck as well, certainly. But if you look at the comments on his first video, most of them are about supporting Ariel, about not intending on coming back for future episodes, about wishing that she were the one launching a podcast instead. I'm recording this video the day after Ned released his second episode, and it is at less than 10,000 views currently. I would be honestly really surprised if his regular numbers moving forward crack 40K regularly. I don't know that people genuinely find him interesting enough to even hate watch if his cooler ex-wife is not there with him. Hardly any of the comments I saw when I scrolled through the second video earlier had anything to do with the interview or his guest, just about how upset people were at his attempt to return to the internet. The thing is, I don't think a rebrand for this sort of guy would have been fully impossible had he hinged just a little bit less of his brand on the wife guy shit. I don't think it's completely unreasonable for him to have assumed that there would be an easy model for him to get back the affection and attention he had been getting online before, because I think lots of men get away with that sort of thing. I think far more men can get away with that sort of thing than women ever could. And for Ariel, good for her wanting to be away from social media. As much as the audience has made it clear that they wish that she would return rather than Ned, though, something I've been returning to in my head for the last few days is that even if Ariel was to return to the internet, I don't feel there would be much space for her to be much more than the betrayed former partner. That is what people want from her. That's what they want to talk about. That's what they want to examine in all of their clips. Did you see Observe has a video that's like, her body language betrays that she's not buying his lies? Motherfucker. Her words say that. You don't need to sleuth anything out. She said that. You could just listen to what a woman says. It doesn't have to be secret body language code. Stop being a pickup artist about it. But anyway, it would appear that Ned has ambitions to be more than just the betraying former partner. And I know this is a less than charitable read of his whole podcast setup, but going from softballing his own interview about cheating on his ex-wife, which was ostensibly his rock bottom, to talking about rock bottoms that involve addiction feels really strange and manipulative, right? As if maybe the whole setup here is to contrast himself with people who he feels did something worse than he addressed in the first episode, and also to make weird soy faces in the thumbnail about them. Like, this is just tasteless. So much of this is tasteless, which I think is part of what people are responding very strongly to this time around. I do want to back up a little bit here, because everybody's talking about the podcast episode. The podcast episode is why I'm making this video, but I want to talk about the scandal as it broke and how it seems to have broken. Like I said before, my interest in this is pretty newfound. I had been under the impression that it was a cheating scandal and an HR issue, but I've spent some time going over some incredibly detailed threads from the Try Guys Reddit, and I've come across some stuff I find really, really interesting. As I've already mentioned, part of my interest here is in the power imbalance inherent between Ned and his affair partner, Alexandria Herring. Alex, being a producer, was actually lower in the hierarchy than Ned, though I think when people refer to her as a producer, they're doing so because it brings to mind the idea that she had some level of authority over him, or at least that it wasn't quite as bad as it looked for him to be having an affair with not just somebody other than his highly involved wife, but an employee. I also mentioned that both Ned and the Try Guys made their respective statements about all of this. The Try Guys on that couch, and Ned on his Instagram with his text post about the consensual workplace relationship. And I don't think that this was a non consensual relationship. I'm not saying that it was. There's never been any allegations of blackmail or quid pro quo, and I feel like it would have come out in their internal investigation if there was any evidence of that. But do you know who was involved who has not seemed to have made any sort of public statement about all of this, as far as I can tell, is Alex. From what I see, she's been dark on social media since everything that went down, something that makes a lot of sense in the context of Ned and Ariel's podcast episode about how overwhelming that period of time in their lives was. Something that also makes a lot of sense in the cultural context of how the other woman is often treated, especially when Alex was not only Ned's affair partner, but had a fiancé of her own who she was cheating on and subsequently broke up with. There are a lot of very helpful Reddit threads on the Try Guys sub that help to break things down day by day, because there was quite a bit of anticipation before the Try Guys made their statement. By the time they sat down on that couch, the speculation about this affair had taken over the internet, with people circulating images that had been taken of Ned and Alex that same month, as well as earlier sightings of them dating back to earlier in that same year. This Reddit discussion, internet circulation is where my interest really truly kicks in this story. Because, yes, as I've already said, the friction between the public image Ned Fulmer was presenting and this new revelation that he was an adulterer was surprising and confronting. A lot of people were genuinely outraged and surprised and frustrated. That's still true, and something else seems to be true too at the same time. Nuance. Allegedly, as I could glean from my Reddit research, much of the early discussion about this affair online seems like it may have come directly from Alex's former fiancé. And this is kind of a lot. Let me walk you through it before I tell you why I feel like this matters. So, for the sake of our timeline, on September 1st, Ned and Alex were spotted together at a Harry Styles concert in New York City. On September 2nd, more Reddit receipts started to circulate. I'm gonna come back to that one in just a moment. Through the rest of September, viewers noticed that Ned was absent from the videos that were being uploaded, and on September 27th, everybody made those announcements that we already mentioned. But, okay, this is the part I want to talk about, those other receipts that were circulating on Reddit. This is via a throwaway account on the Try Guys Reddit. I'm going to link the post in the description below. I found it so useful for this. On September 3rd, u/Hamilton390 account has been deleted, made this Reddit post where they say, multiple people have seen Ned around New York City this week making out with women at the local bars. It's unfortunate for Ariel, his family, and the Try team, but this is true. A Redditor, let's call them X, commented on this post, saying, source, I made it up, implying that u/Hamilton390 was making up this claim. Then, u/Hamilton390 messaged X and shared screenshots of an Instagram conversation from September 2nd. In the Instagram conversation, a seemingly random person, let's call them Z, contacted u/Hamilton390 and said they saw Ned and Alex kissing in a club in New York City. Z included a blurry video. u/Hamilton390 claims to have talked to Ariel for an hour about the situation. u/Hamilton390 sends X a screenshot of their phone contact of Ned as further evidence that they actually know Ned. u/Hamilton390 then claims to be Will, Alex's fiancé and partner of 10 plus years, who is not an employee of Second Try LLC. All of this can be found in the attached album, linked. X thought the DMs were fake and not credible, so they did not post them on the subreddit until September 25th. Other points on the timeline to do with this account. Twitter account at Ned Fulmer Expose tweeted that someone edited the Instagram conversation screenshots and was able to reveal the Instagram username of Z, mentioned above. Z and Will follow each other on Instagram, serving as evidence that u/Hamilton390 truly is Will. September 3rd, u/Hamilton390 makes this Reddit comment. Maybe it's the fact that Ned openly cheats on his wife and has no remorse, but still plays the family man persona on the channel. Kind of wild, on a post about somebody's girlfriend hating Ned. A TikTok was posted where allegedly someone saw Alex and Ned together at a restaurant in Burbank, California in May. The person messaged Ariel on Instagram and sent the video. The person claims that Alex and Ned were kissing. At WillThayer3 on TikTok, seems like Will, made several comments, including, "I wish I knew in May," shrug emoji, and "should have sent it to me." The TikToker later added that the video was recorded on May 7th around 5 p.m. and that Ariel did not respond to the messages. I want to say the concept of learning via fans of you and your husband that said husband is cheating on you is genuinely horrifying. I don't know if Ariel saw that message all the way back in May. Maybe she had her Instagram messages filtered, but it's still extremely upsetting even without the will of it all. But, like, we should probably talk about the alleged will of it all, right? To be clear again, this is what the Reddit record keepers who were there at the time wrote. I am not the one coming up with the theory that this is Will. That's based on the positioning and colors of the Instagram message bubbles in the screenshots. They look to be something Will took screenshots of and then disseminated. And it's not even just the comment history on the deleted Reddit that points towards this. There's a little more too. There's a whole Daily Mail write-up about Will, this ex-fiance, doing this smarmy glass raise on Instagram following all of this fallout about the affair. There are also over 4,000 upvotes on a post on Reddit of him meeting up in a celebratory manner with the person who reached out to him with the receipts about the cheating. I find this weird. To be clear, I understand that Will would have been hurt. Very hurt. This was his fiancée, someone he was planning on building a life with. A lot of the internet seems to also understand this hurt from him. I would say they understand it even more than I do, because while I understand that hurt, the rest of this is actually pretty concerning to me. I'm not arguing that Alex didn't do anything wrong or that Will didn't have a right to have big feelings about her affair, but in line with a lot of what we end up talking about here on this channel when it comes to the public opinion around a woman, all right, walk with me here. If you're somebody who tends to fall into the really hard line, cheaters deserve whatever they get and get no sympathy from me camp, you're not really gonna like what I have to say here, but doesn't this feel kind of astroturfy? Doesn't this maybe look like possibly part of the reason the fervor around this took on such a deep hold was because somebody who was very invested in making sure it caught on tossed a few logs of his own onto the flames? I'm not saying that there wouldn't still have been fan backlash and outcry about this. The fact that people were reaching out to Will and Ariel at all pretty much proves that there would have been people who were invested in this in that way. But I still find something pretty concerning about this. Like, yes, Alex should not have cheated on her fiance. Yeah, it would be really embarrassing to be betrayed like that on such a grand scale. But also, these kind of sort of seem like the actions that somebody who would like to ruin somebody's life would take, right? Like, I can understand feeling hurt. I have a lot of empathy for Ariel's clear hurt and betrayal, but I also have a lot of respect for how she's never taken that and done a weaponized campaign against somebody with it. I feel pretty confident I would have seen records of any shady Instagram or Twitter likes that Ariel might have made during all of this, because everybody was really diligent about what posts other players in this story were liking on social media. Ariel seems to have stayed out of it. I'm sure she has her own private and personal opinions, as is her right, but she didn't take any opportunity during the podcast episode to make a dig at Alex, even though she probably knew that anything she said that might even remotely resemble that would be picked up like wildfire. I thought Ariel did a great job at keeping the blame solely on Ned, who was again at the top of the power imbalance and was the one who was starting this podcast, the one who had decided to talk about this, the one who seemed to still kind of be hoping for some kind of on-camera absolution up until she admitted to still being angry with him for what he did. And while I don't think that it's wrong to be hurt by being cheated on, I don't even think it's wrong to talk about being hurt by being cheated on, but do that with your own name if you're gonna do it, right? I think it's wrong to get so angry that you put in a concentrated effort under a throwaway account to ruin somebody's life, and then you seem to cheers to that multiple times on social media when you kind of successfully do it. I do think that it's kind of concerning to think that all a vindictive former partner would really need in order to enact the sort of revenge that can force somebody to go dark on social media for multiple years is to activate the nearest fan base that knows anything about them and let them loose. That doesn't seem like a great precedent. I'm not sure how controversial an opinion that's going to be, because it's not controversial at all in my personal friend group. The friends who paid closer attention than I did have thought this already for quite a while. But I also know that a lot of people sometimes struggle to find any empathy whatsoever for people who cheat. And I know this happens for a lot of reasons, sometimes because of personal experiences. I've been cheated on. It wasn't fun, and it wasn't even a situation where I was engaged to somebody and making life plans. But still, I do find something really messed up about somebody involved in the situation enjoying the flames after pouring gasoline on them in a Reddit community. And I especially feel that way even more, really, when Ariel spoke about how hard the attention was on her during all of this, how much she felt like she was constantly being judged, and how much shame she was carrying at that time. I don't like this. I don't like it for Ariel, and I don't like it for Alex. And I don't have to think that Alex has never done anything wrong for me to not like the way things have shaken out for her. I've been swinging back and forth as I did my research for this video about whether or not I was even surprised that this all ended up tying back into the misogyny slop ecosystem theory. I guess I'm not really surprised. The entire theory of the MSE is that it's an easy content model for people to get sucked into because it appeals to the most basic and societally ingrained instincts of both the creators and their audience, and that it's something that totally could exist with or without shady PR firms and Johnny Depp affiliated bot networks pumping numbers up. And it's not that I think that all of the content that has been made around this was misogyny slop. I think a lot of it is actually focused primarily on Ned, and as I hope I've made clear in this video, Ned Fulmer is not somebody who I feel very invested in protecting from criticism. I do think there's something to be concerned about, though, in the way the power imbalance was papered over in favor of pretending like it was a truly low-stakes drama, or that every amount of backlash that was ever received by anyone other than Ariel was completely and truly justified. There's something sort of Monica Lewinsky adjacent to me in the framing of Alex, as though the power gap here didn't matter. It might not have mattered in terms of their consensual workplace relationship. She might not have felt pressured when her boss was sniffing around her. It's not for me to say, because she hasn't really said anything on the issue, but it matters now, doesn't it? The power imbalance? It matters when her ex-fiancé managed to conscript a bunch of very passionate strangers into his personal war against her. It matters when she has been forced into hiding, when she doesn't have the same sort of options to attempt a personal rebrand as a man like Ned Fulmer does, with his audacity and his male privilege and his who me oh shucks attitude. The power imbalance matters when Ned Fulmer can rent a podcast set and try to get his ex-wife to forgive him on camera for the benefit of the audience, and when we live in a society where he thinks there's even a chance of that working out for him. It matters when, as Eugene pointed out in their response video on that couch, women historically tend to get the worse end of this particular stick. So, no, I don't think Will conscripted shadowy agents. I don't think there are bots involved here, but I don't think he needed any of that. I think on a societal level, we are always ready to direct ire onto a woman, and I think it's the sort of thing we ought to maybe be a little bit more thoughtful about when we're asked to do it. I would be very interested to hear Alex's side of this story someday, and I find it sad that she seems to have had to go entirely into hiding after all of this. I find it sad to know how overbearing the hate toward her would be if she were to try to make a reappearance, but if she does launch a podcast, I'd probably watch it. I have sunk so many hours into turning this whole thing over in my head over the last week, so I think I might as well conclude this video before it ends up being multiple hours long. I don't think the ex-Try Guy, ex-wife guy's podcast is going to be a very successful attempt at a comeback. I don't think that he's entitled to another shot at his audience's trust, and I feel like he's going to struggle to find a new audience, though I guess I could be surprised if he manages to find the right niche with his upcoming guests and their audiences. I think both Alex and Ned are still young, and I don't know that I can endorse the idea that an early 30s cheating scandal should completely ruin either life involved, even if I do have quite a bit more of a soft spot for the employee involved in this sort of thing than I do for the boss. I think also we know from history that it's quite a bit easier for a woman's life to stay damaged from this sort of thing than for a man to be kept down for it. So I kind of struggle to find my empathy for the faceplant in views on Ned's second episode of his podcast and the overwhelming feeling of, all right, yeah, we aren't buying it coming from his comment section because, well, welcome to being any woman who gets sucked into this kind of scandal or who even gets accused of it, except that you would struggle to find one who would launch a goddamn podcast about it. Oh my god. I officially understand why everybody got invested in this when it was a big story. There was more to sink my teeth into here than I had expected when this all went down 3 years ago, but I still feel like I personally would have been unlikely to cover this without the podcast sort of feeling to me like a consent from Ariel for people to speak about the situation. I think there's a difference in the content coming out now where people are sort of reacting to the oddness of the podcast content and the invasive speculative updates people were making about things like Ned and Ariel being spotted at a concert together, the kind of thing that I wouldn't include in my videos anyway. I'm rooting for a couple of the people involved here, and other ones I distrust, to put it kindly. If Alex does return to the internet, I'd like to hope she would be met with some level of nuance and compassion, but, I also know the internet we all exist on, and that mostly exists in this little corner. I would love to know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my friend Marty for helping me so much with this video and with my beautiful thumbnails as of recently. Thank you also to Aura for sponsoring this video and so many others on the channel, and thank you to my lovely Patreon members, a few of whose names you can see on the screen right now. Patreon is a great way to help support me financially, and you get a couple of extra videos a month over there. Thank you also to my YouTube channel members and to everybody who has sent me donations on Ko-fi, super chats, or super thanks on my live streams. All of that is such a huge help. Thank you so much for watching. Maybe don't cheat on your wife. I love you.